Hi everybody, it's Kiri from Mindful Moves, and today we're going to be talking about Autism Spectrum Disorder. So Autism Spectrum Disorder. So the first thing we come to appreciate is that this is a spectrum, and we will get into that. The next thing we notice is that it's a behavioural defined disorder. So those looking to diagnose will watch a child's behaviour and observe how they interact with the world and the caregivers within. If they participate, if they're engaged, if they withdraw. And so yes, it gets quite involved. But where does it come from? Nobody still to this day can really say. We do think that perhaps, yes, it could be genetics or genes within the genetics, and that children can be born with a predisposition. We do see two types of things happening, where we've got children who are born straight away, who don't point, who don't wave, who don't respond, who don't engage in the world around them. And then we have the other types of children who are bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, responding, interacting with the world around them, and then all of a sudden, at around 18 months, it's like a switch is flipped, and we see this total regression. And so loss of speech, loss of eye contact, loss of the sense that they want to interact with the world. And so there's much debate as to why this happens. But what we do see is that many specialists actually agree that when we have a regression, that it is very important to start considering whether it is, in fact, autism spectrum disorder. There's much debate, as I say, with whether it's to do with the toxins being exposed, the child being exposed to, whether it's to do with a disease or an illness that the child has suffered. But nevertheless, going forward, we look for these things and then, of course, see how we can assist these children. And so, yes, the first one, speech delay or absence. Many children on the spectrum will have a very particular way of speaking. Some might even have an accent when they don't come from a particular country. Interesting intonation, so emphasis on certain parts of the words or sentences that we wouldn't really put that way. And so yes, in South Africa, where we talk, and of course we go down towards the end of a sentence, they might even go up and sound like they're constantly asking a question. Also monotone type of voice, very little expression sometimes within. But again, as we get into this, we're going to see how this can really go to each pole. As I say, also the absence of speech, and so yes, my story, at about 18 months, this loss of words that I saw happening within my son. So absolutely losing the speech that he originally had. Social interaction. So here we often talk about eye contact, although it's not always the case. But yes, this battling to interact and connect socially. We see social imagination, narrow and restricted repertoire of behaviours and range of interests. And that's just a picture I've included where my son actually, he loved cars, the other one is dinosaurs, and would line them up. And so what we see as a very different way of playing with objects, this very literal understanding again of the world around. And so not driving the car and vrooming it perhaps like you should, imagining it to be a bigger car, and yet in this imaginative play being able to really engage with the toy, but rather becoming about the process of play. And so the lining up of toys, the categorizing according to similarities. In our work, this very left brain thinking, when these children should be very right brained at that age. And then yes, a very big one here is the social processing complications, which we'll get into, having a lot to do with reflexes that need to integrate. But what does this mean for the child? It means that they are incredibly sensitive or not, depending on where they fall on the spectrum, to their sensory input that's coming in. They can get overwhelmed by this incredibly quickly, and of course we will get into that. And so as I was speaking, you can see it is so difficult to really map a child with autism or with Asperger's, because everything is about these 4 areas but placed differently on a scale. So as we see here, either towards the severely impaired side or, towards the gifted side. And this is where we do sometimes, not all the time, get savants. And so what do we have occurring here? We have a splintered, so we call splintered abilities, really fantastic in certain areas, especially those that they're interested in, and then other areas really, really struggling, even to the extent, as we see here, where they could be considered as being severely impaired in a certain area. And so we have to really sit and try, or the powers that be will try and map a child according to these things and see how it is that we can assist each of the things coming up. So yes, in terms of measured intelligence, they could be gifted or severely impaired. In terms of social interaction, they can be gifted or severely impaired. In terms of communication, gifted or severely impaired. And so it goes on for behaviours and sensory and motor as well. So here we just appreciate the overlap that children might have. So they might not just have autism in itself, but they might then also be experiencing autism and symptoms of ADHD or OCD or Tourette syndrome, or might even have other cognitive defects. But for me, sadly, as I look at this Venn diagram, so it would be, I really see a lot of anxiety jumping out at me and unintegrated reflexes. And so in the terms of the work I do, not being able to diagnose, but being able to assist children, I start to wonder what type of movement would I be bringing in order to help reflexes integrate so that these children can experience far less anxiety. And also this type of work would definitely help with reading, writing and other academic skills, which means they would have more success in the class. And of course that's what we want, because sadly when we're working with children such as these, one huge symptom of this cause ends up being poor self-esteem. And we see this as we tick off checklists to try and begin to observe what these children are battling with many of these points steering towards poor self-esteem and high levels of anxiety. So just a little bit more about autism spectrum disorder. I often hear a parent tell me my child is so clever in certain ways, and of course again referring to that splinter ability. So something's coming up. If you've met one child on the spectrum, as I said before, please remember you have met one child on the spectrum. With autism spectrum disorder, it is so different to many other types of disorders and disabilities out there, barriers out there, in the fact that in each child it presents completely different. So what does it mean for me as a teacher or me as a movement facilitator or educational consultant? It means that I have to treat each and every child with autism like a completely different case. I cannot put them in a box. I cannot take what's worked for someone else and try and apply it to this child. So for each and every child, it's almost as though we have to have a consultation and an understanding with specialists as what we need to then support this child with. Another thing to understand is that girls are really good at masking, and it's really sad for many of them because they get misdiagnosed so often with things like anxiety disorders, depression, sensory disorders, and then only later in life getting the proper label as to say, well, actually this is autism spectrum disorder. Why is this? It's because they have better eye contact a lot of the time, better language skills, they have better play and social skills, and their behaviours are far more subtle. As I said before, they often get diagnosed much later in life, and we have them being diagnosed about 16, 17, 18 years, which, let's face it, is right at the end of their schooling career, and sadly means that they haven't had the support they've needed from the word go. They also tend, as I say, then to battle with depression, anxiety, and with feelings like I just don't fit in. I can remember speaking to an adult with autism, and they shared with me that they learned to trick the system, but it always felt like it was a game they needed to play that they didn't quite understand, and so they had to learn the rules. As I've said before, we've got splinted abilities. In terms of the work we do, we often will find that the child is a left-brained child at a younger age, as I've mentioned before, instead of being more right-brained. And this is because their brain is just wired differently, when they should be learning through play, experience, connection, colour, shape, space, in actual fact, they are often learning more abstract and able to pick up, yes, perhaps in some cases, symbols, letters, numbers, and can be very good with reading. And that is a story where I've worked with one kid who could read from a very young age, read very fluently, but actually the minute he started speaking, without having to read, of course that fluency went, and would speak using very little words, and when I say little in terms of vocabulary, choosing the simpler word rather than the bigger one. So yes, as I say, the big issue for me is that often these children are not getting the help that they need. And in my experience, as I've put at the bottom there, I'm working in classes and Sunday school where I'm just seeing more and more kids. And so yes, at the school I'm working at, of a class of 25, of course we're not allowed to diagnose, but when I'm working with them, I'm seeing about 4 of those 25 who could possibly be put on the spectrum as being borderline. And so yes, I think to the parents is to please use get them assessed and get them the help that they need. In my Sunday school class, out of 20, I've got 5 also, I suspect about 5, with 3 of those being formally diagnosed. And so what am I saying? I'm saying that there's definitely an increase. We're seeing far more kids on the spectrum, and we as adults and teachers definitely need to do our homework and begin to understand how it is that they learn. The thing with autism and Asperger's, when I talk about autism, we talk about the spectrum from beginning to end, wherever they may fall, whether borderline or not. We're talking about a child who learns incredibly differently. For all other disabilities, many other barriers, the child will still learn more or less the same way that the normal neurotypical child is learning, just perhaps slower, and you might need to back it up and just make sure that you've consolidated ideas that should have been in place. However, when we talk about children with on the autistic spectrum disorder, on the spectrum there, we talk about a child who is learning completely differently, and so that means that I need to change the strategy that I'm using in my class, and I need to understand how is it that I need to change my strategy. So how do these children battle in the classroom? And I often hear, this is my go-to line when working with teachers, is I often hear, there's something wrong, but I just don't know what. I just can't put my foot on it. It's often for me, okay, well, have you ruled out? And that's my wording today. Not, yes, this is, we get them diagnosed, we get them. But my question is, and this is what the conversation we as teachers need to be having, have you ruled out autistic spectrum disorder? Because we are sitting with so many borderline children and so many kids who are able to mask so well, who potentially are suffering in terms of their mental health at this point. And so these children, as I say, they battle with huge amounts of anxiety. And yes, this is even so with change of routine. They battle making friends, and they battle with the hidden agendas. They battle with sarcasm, and they battle with people not saying what they mean. So often, these children know something is off. They can feel it. Many of them are incredibly intuitive. They can sense it. Within a social situation, they can feel that someone's being nasty, or someone's having a dig at them, or someone's saying something that doesn't feel right, but they don't have the skills to figure it out always, and even if they do, to respond in a way that's going to protect themselves, yet be assertive and move forward. And so even, yes, the places are like in the school where recess and games and play is supposed to be fun and an outlet of energy, it's incredibly stressful for them. And it's almost a toss-up as to whether they'd want to be in the bright little class with fluorescent lights and 40 children making a noise while the teacher's shouting and trying to teach, or if they want to be on the playground where they don't actually quite know how to work through these things. So yes, they battle with reading between the lines, innuendos and euphemisms, and so questioning also when they tend to want to ask these children to apply themselves, also much younger than 12, which is age appropriate, when they have to take case studies and think about how people would think and put them in their, put themselves in that person's shoes. Even the simple thing of gauging which teacher likes to ask a certain way and what teacher is suggesting that this is the correct answer or the most correct answer can be incredibly difficult for these children. And so yes, they are definitely being discriminated against when we have harsh memos and unforgiving memos that do not take into consideration if it's correct or not, or rather if it's marked according to memo. And finding a lot of the children I'm working with really battling with this. So also battles, as I say, to find what the teacher might think of being the most important answer, and is often penalized, as I just said, because they're not answering according to the memo or according to the way the teacher put it forward. They don't understand the questions if they aren't asked directly, and I've seen a lot of problems coming up where euphemisms or sayings are used to answer or explain another saying. And so none of those questions are anchored in concrete black and white or anything that's direct that they can actually access to, being very left brain, very literal here. This puts stress on the system in a class that's noisy, like I said, with fluorescent or very bright lights, where we sit in classes where these lights are even still flickering. They become anxious and they cannot read facial expressions. And so they can't also read the temperature of the room. And so often, they don't get when or why the teacher got upset. They couldn't see that the situation was changing, that this teacher was getting more anxious, especially if the teacher didn't say it. And then all of a sudden the teacher's upset. And so these children tend to be anxious all the time because they just don't know if or when a teacher might become upset. And when they do have a meltdown, and this does happen because of all the things I've just spoken about, I'm hoping as I speak about it, we can understand just how stressful this is. They're busy juggling so many things, and often these children have many reflexes out. Reflexes interrupt the natural flow between the sense organ and the brain, and then the information from the brain back again. And so yes, reflexes are put into place for survival, but yes, when they're triggered, they then of course trigger feelings of anxiety and the like. And so yes, having to override so many reflexes that are out puts incredible strain on the system. And so if you can just imagine riding in a car in the rain with the sound blaring, and how quick we are as perhaps a parent to lose our cool when the children are arguing in the back. On top of that, or we need to switch off that radio in order to see, because there's just too much coming in and it's really working on our nerves. And so these children feel like this on a day-to-day basis. And so yes, they are far more susceptible to meltdowns. Their fuse is just that much shorter because they are having to juggle just so much more. And when they do, when they have this meltdown, so often these poor children are then also labelled as being defiant. So what can we do for these children? So yes, there is no cure, but there definitely is treatment. And as I say, we need to map each child's strengths and weaknesses to see how it is that we can support them. The things I've come to use in my line of work and personally myself, we've had audiologists right at the word go to just check hearing. This led to them needing speech therapists so we could really learn how people speak and how to decode what they are saying and the message behind what it is that people are saying. Then how to think about it and reword it. The speech therapist that my son goes to has been phenomenal, and taught him how to answer the questions, taught him how to look for reading in between the lines, and so put into place skills that many children naturally get through interacting in the world and having relationships and understanding relationships with people. These things need to be taught. Occupational therapists, and it's very important that it's an SI trained one. When we talk about SI trained, we're talking about sensory integration. When we're talking about sensory integration, we're talking about integrating reflexes. Because so many of these reflexes are out, we really have to start there with these children. Movement facilitator, that's something I do. And of course, that's putting in programs, movement programs that can be done by teachers in the class every single day. And of course, movement facilitator courses are open and available to all people. And of course, knowing these movements means that you can implement programs so that these children are getting the right movements in every day to calm the system down, to ready them for learning, and then of course integrate reflexes. Neurofeedback has been a wonderful one that we found in our life, just to help in terms of brain waves and neurotransmitters. And yes, I'm sure we'll talk about that sometime in the future. Sound therapy, something that we've also affiliated with, is Prosper Learning System or program. But there are many sound therapy programs out there that you could definitely use, especially because many of our children on the spectrum battle to sleep. They battle to go into the right brainwave at the right time, and we're seeing a lot of delta and theta, which are your sleep brainwaves, when they're awake, when in actual fact that needs to be there when they're sleeping to make sure they get a good night's sleep so that they can operate in alpha and beta and even gamma when they're awake. And yes, many of them do need psychologists, sadly, to help with self-esteem and depression and anxiety. But also what many of these psychologists do is talk them through situations and train them up, as I say, in those life skills that they haven't always acquired. Some of them to the extent that they're talking about emotions and becoming aware of when did I feel it and how did I feel it. Is it a good emotion? Is it a bad emotion? When did the emotion start? So that they can get in touch again with who they are, how they're feeling. And then of course the psychologist will train them how to deal with each of these situations that they don't know. Giving them, because so often this is what they do need to do, is to develop a science to operate in a world that's so foreign to them. I think for them this is the biggest thing. When I talk to people, when I talk to people in my own family, it's this understanding that they operate so differently, and it's this learning how to operate in a world that is so foreign and has these rules and games and hidden agendas that they are needing to learn how to decipher the whole time. So yes, if you want to find out more about the work that we do, we offer workshops and courses so that you can learn more about this and other stuff. Individual sessions so we can help you where you stuck personally with goals or obstacles. Educational consulting where I'm able to take this information and take it across to teachers and parents. Profiling sessions where we work out your child or you or your partner and you, your individual strengths and weaknesses, personality type. We put together movement programs, and we also have other things such as reading programs. We'll see you again. If you like this, please again subscribe and like so that you can see more of our videos. Thanks so much.